Okay, so we normally start with these prayers, and then after that we'll do a little meditation. So tonight, how about we recite the prayer of refuge and bodhicitta 2 times in English, and then we can do it 1 time in Tibetan, just to get more accustomed to that. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodan Soki Chognam La Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jin Sangi Pe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. And the next prayer, we usually pause a short time after each line to have a chance to contemplate the meaning of the words that we're saying and try to generate that particular immeasurable thought in our mind. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that hold some close and others distant. Okay, then the 7th prayer. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So we recite this prayer of the Buddha 1 time, that's in Tibetan, and then we recite the mantra of the Buddha, which is in Sanskrit, a few times. And if you like, you can imagine the Buddha in front of you, or you can also imagine many Buddhas, because there are actually many Buddhas. So you can imagine them in front of you and around you, and imagine light flowing from them into you, the light representing their love and compassion and all their other positive qualities pouring into you to help you to transform yourself, to transform your mind, to have less unhappy, disturbing, and mistaken thoughts, feelings, conceptions, and have more positive ones, more love and compassion, to develop your own potential for enlightenment, your Buddha nature. Lama Tunma Chomden De Deshin Shekpa Da Chomba Yang Takpa Dzogbe Sangye Pagyawa Shakya Tupala Chatselo Chuto Kyapsu Chiwo. Oh, sorry, it's different version this time. Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. 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 Okay, so now let's do some meditation. And what we've been doing in the class for the last month or so, I forget, is the three principal aspects of the path. And we've reached the last of those three, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. So we started looking at that last week, and I thought we could do a little bit of meditation related to that now. But first, let us just sit quietly for a while. And you can do the meditation on the breath, being aware of the breath coming in, going out. So try to be as relaxed as you can, both physically in your body, so if you do notice any tension anywhere in your body, see if you can let it go. One way you could do that is to imagine that it melts and flows out of you and flows down and sinks into the earth beneath us, where it just disappears and leaves your body feeling as light and comfortable and relaxed as possible. And it's also important to relax the mind. So we can do that by letting go of or putting aside any thoughts, any worries, any concerns that there may be circling around in our mind, left over from things that may have happened to us today, or things we have to do later, tonight, or tomorrow. So try your best to just put aside any such thoughts. You can always take them up again later if you need to, but just for now, give yourself a break from those thoughts. Give yourself a break to just be in the present moment, right here, right now, paying attention to the breath flowing in and flowing out. So it's scientifically proven that paying attention to the breath, just watching the breath coming in and going out, has a relaxing effect on our body and our mind. So do the best you can to just stay with the breath. Stay with each full inhalation and exhalation of the breath. Try to do this one breath after another. And it might happen that your mind will wander away to something else, like another thought or sound. And as soon as you notice that that has happened, just gently pull back, disengage from that other object, let it go, put it aside, and come back to the breath. And it's completely okay if you have to do this again and again. There's nothing wrong, nothing bad about it. Just be very kind and gentle with yourself and just keep coming back to the breath again and again whenever you wander away. And now, just for a few more minutes, continue to keep your attention mainly on the breath. Be aware of the breath flowing in and out. But see if you can take a part of your mind, like a little corner of your mind, and use that to try to observe your sense of I or self, me. And this doesn't mean in a very discursive, analytical way, but just observing your awareness, your sense of sitting here, being here in this place and doing meditation. Just try to look out for a sense of I, sense of who you are, what you are, this I, this me, this person who is sitting here and doing meditation. So it's just to observe. It's just to get a sense, a clearer sense of how you see your I, yourself, how it appears, how it feels. And just try to do that. Don't worry if you're not able to, but just try to do it. So as I mentioned, we are now looking at the topic of emptiness, which is said to be the true nature of everything that exists. And it's a very important, crucial topic to understand. And in the tradition we follow here, the Gelugpa tradition, it is recommended that we begin our investigation into the topic of emptiness by looking at the emptiness of our own self, our I, or me. Because everything, whatever exists, has emptiness as its true nature, its ultimate nature. But we can't just immediately understand the emptiness of everything. So we have to start with understanding the emptiness of one object. And if we if we can understand the emptiness of one object, then it becomes very easy to understand the emptiness of everything else. And so what is recommended in this tradition is the object that we start with is our sense of self, I, me. And so that involves first getting to know or identify a false sense of self, a false sense of I or me that we have that's part of our experience. And then once we are able to identify that and recognize that, then we use various reasonings to realize that it actually can't exist the way it appears. It's a false, it's like an illusion or a hallucination, something that appears but actually isn't really there. And I've read, and I can't remember where I read this now, but it seemed to be a reliable source, that yogis, meditators who are really working hard at this process will spend a lot of time just observing their sense of self or sense of I or me, to get familiar with how they do see themselves before they then start refuting or negating this false sense of self or I. So they don't just immediately pounce on the sense of self, but they get very, very familiar with it. You heard that? Mm-hmm. Read that? Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. I wasn't hallucinating. I just can't remember where it was. Even the Dalai Lama, fifth Dalai Lama. Yeah, but it's probably many sources.
I think my armpit said that in a long retreat, the yogi will spend a whole year.
Who said this?
I think it was Gimla Rinpoche.
Oh, yeah.
I think he said it's like if they're doing a long, like years retreat, they'll spend a whole year just getting really clear what's called
the object of negation, the false I. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's
and I was actually thinking maybe an analogy of that would be maybe not an accurate analogy, but let's say the police are suspicious of a particular person that they think might be a terrorist or a criminal or something, and they don't just immediately, arrest the person because they really want to make sure, that they do have evidence against this person. So they'll spend some time watching. They'll spend time observing this person, and just checking what they're doing and who they're meeting with and so on and so forth. So they kind of spy on this person. They do this in a very subtle way, not in an obvious way, because they really want to, see this person as they normally behave and check to see if they really are engaging in some criminal behavior or not. So they spend some time first, checking this person, watching this person before they then go in and pounce on them. So I thought maybe it's a little bit the same with our sense of self or I. That, it wouldn't be wise to just immediately pounce on the sense of I, and before we really have a good basis for this process of refuting its false mode of existence. And also another thing I mentioned last week, that there are various steps that are recommended to take in the process of understanding emptiness. One of those is purification. It's said that it's really important to do a lot of purification practices like Vajrasattva, prostrations, and so on. We need to purify, clean out our collection of bad energy from the past, because otherwise that sort of clogs up our mind and makes it harder for us to understand emptiness. And one of my teachers, Geshe-Yon Darge, once explained why this is, and I found that his explanation really helpful, really made sense to me. He said, again, it's like this process of searching for and refuting the false I is again like trying to catch a criminal, somebody who's a thief or a murderer or a terrorist, and so the police are trying to catch this person. And if there are many hiding places for this person, like if they're in a really crowded town and there's lots of places where they can hide, then it becomes very hard to catch this person. They're chasing after him or her and they disappear. And on the other hand, if they could get this person to a big open space, like a football field, there's just totally nothing there, no trees, no houses, no holes in the ground, nowhere they can hide, then it's easy to catch them. They can very easily get in there and grab the person. And so it's similar with our own mind. If we are trying to search for and refute a false sense of I, and if our mind is cluttered with a lot of disturbing thoughts and emotions, a lot of messy stuff, then the I will hide itself in among these disturbances in our mind. It hides itself in our delusions, and then it becomes very hard to catch. But if we can clear out our mind, if we can make our mind more calm, more clear, more pure and positive, there's fewer hiding places. And so then it becomes easier when we do go in there and try to, catch this false sense of self. It's a lot easier, like, trying to catch the thief in a football field. So I thought, oh, okay, that sounds good. So that helped me to see the connection between purification and understanding emptiness. So doing purification practice and also doing calm abiding. I think if you can, because normally in the teachings on calm abiding, in other words, developing single-pointed concentration, that explanation comes before the teachings on emptiness. And I think, again, if it would be so helpful if we could really develop calm abiding, even if we can't get all the way to calm abiding, but pretty good concentration, because that means your mind is much more calm and clear and you're able to focus. And so again, if going through this process of trying to identify and catch this false sense of self or I and see how it is false becomes much easier if your mind is able to stay in a calm and clear state. So anyway, a lot of work to do. So I have slides for tonight. So we're going to need to pull that screen down. And if you're sitting over there, you could move over here. Okay, so again, we've been going through the three principal aspects of the path, and this little text by Lama Zopa, and using the book with Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's commentary. So we've covered the first two of the three principal aspects of the path: renunciation, or the wish for freedom, and then altruistic intention, or bodhicitta. So we're now on the third of the three, which is correct view. Correct view meaning the correct view of emptiness or selflessness. And in last week's class, we started looking at this topic with verse 9 of the text, which basically says that even if we manage to develop the first two of the three principles, in other words, the wish for freedom and bodhicitta, but if we lack this one, if we lack the correct view, we will not be able to achieve enlightenment, and we won't even be able to free ourselves from cyclic existence, samsara. And so this third of the principal aspects, the correct view, is really, really important. It's essential. It's like a key that opens the gate to the prison of cyclic existence, enabling us to get out of cyclic existence. And then, if we wish to, if we want to follow the Mahayana path and work for the benefit of all living beings, then we can help all other beings become enlightened. Become free of samsara as well, and lead them to enlightenment. So this is very, very important. And as I mentioned, the usual in the Gelugpa tradition, it's recommended we start looking at emptiness with regard to our own sense of self, or I. I just want to add a kind of footnote to that, because there's some discussion among Western people who are both Buddhists and meditators and teachers of meditation, and also psychologists, about whether there might be risks with regard to looking into the topic of emptiness or selflessness if one's just normal sense of self is not really developed very well, is sort of undeveloped or underdeveloped or unhealthy or kind of distorted in some ways, which often happens to people because of maybe childhood experiences. They may not have received sufficient love and nurturing as children, or they may have had traumatic experiences as children, and so their sense of self, or I, is not very well developed. And then if they go into this topic of selflessness, no self, it could be risky, not necessarily, but it could be. And so we need to be careful. I mean, actually, it is said in the Buddhist teachings that we have to be careful about teaching emptiness, because some people can misunderstand it and end up with wrong views and more confusion than they had before. They say we have to be very careful about who we teach emptiness to. But someone like me, who doesn't have clairvoyance and can't see people's minds, I can't see, what's going on in people's minds. So I don't really know if people listening to me are ready for teaching on emptiness or not. But anyway, it is just to be aware that there could be possible problems. And there was an article written by an American man. I don't know him. I've just heard of him. And he's a psychologist, psychoanalyst, as well as a Buddhist meditator and teacher. His name is Jack Engler. And he wrote an article more than 30 years ago in which he made this comment: you have to be somebody before you can be nobody. And he said this came out of his work, because he says, as in his work as a therapist, he is trying to help people who, for example, if they're schizophrenic or if they're psychotic or whatever, they don't have a sense of self. Their sense of self is just like fractured or fragmented or whatever. So he's trying to actually build up a sense of self in them. And then as a meditation teacher, he's teaching people to, deconstruct their sense of self. So he's saying this situation he found himself in was quite interesting, and gave rise to a lot of thoughts. So I actually put his article, if anyone wants to read it, on the website under it's called Transformations of Consciousness. Actually, it's from a book called Transformations of Consciousness, but that article, there's only that article on there. It's quite interesting what he's saying in there, and I found quite... so anyway, the basic idea he's proposing is that you need to be a happy, healthy human being before you can go beyond that. Well, I mean, relatively, of course, but... Anyway, the point is there could be some dangers there if you're not, your sense of self and ego and so on isn't very well developed. And then you try to jump into emptiness. It could be problematic. Yeah.
As long as you have to have the right concept before you can go to no concept.
Yeah. And also I found an article by Alex Berzin on his website. I haven't had a chance to read it, but it looks really, really interesting. And it's actually a course that he gave, I think in Latvia. And it's basically talking about how you do develop a healthy sense of self by progressing through the Lam Rim, starting with the precious human life and so on. So if you're going progressively through the Lam Rim, you will develop a healthy sense of self. So I'll put that on the website as well in case anyone would like to read it. I would like to read it. I just have to find some time. Anyway, there's discussion about this. So just to let you know, and you could probably do your own research and look into this more about this topic. But I'm saying it because sometimes Tibetan Lamas don't seem to always be aware of this problem. I've seen it myself. Some Western people come along and they show this incredible enthusiasm for practicing Dharma, but actually they're kind of fractured, and sometimes the lamas don't seem to recognize that, and they think, oh, this person is really a good practitioner. Sometimes they even get ordained, they even become monks and nuns, and then it's really problematic. So anyway, maybe it's not necessary for me to mention this, but it is something to be aware of. So I think, and I do agree with this, I think it is important that we have a good, healthy sense of self and self-esteem, and feeling good about ourselves, not hating ourselves, not thinking we're garbage, which does happen to a lot of Western people, in order to practice the path, not just with regard to correct view, but the Bodhisattva's path in general. Because if you think I want to become enlightened, help all living beings, you have to have a very healthy, strong sense of self-confidence. You have to believe in yourself. You can't think you're garbage and then follow the path to enlightenment. So, yeah. So if that is a problem, we need to take care of that one, work on that. And also, it's important to keep in mind that this whole topic of selflessness or emptiness does not mean total non-existence, that there is no self at all. I've been listening to some talks by Alan Wallace, and he mentioned this. He says, he sometimes meets people who are Buddhists, particularly in the Theravada tradition, and they think that selflessness means zero self, no self. They really take that literally. There is no self at all, not even a conventional self. That's not how it's explained in our tradition. There is a self, a conventionally existing self. We're going to look more at that tonight. But there's a false sense of self. There's kind of a false sense of me or I here inside of us, and we need to identify that and clear that away, because it's like an illusion, creation of the mind, fabrication of the mind, not really there. So we need to distinguish the self that does exist and the self that doesn't exist. Okay, so the last line of verse 9, which we looked at last week, mentions make effort in the means to comprehend dependent arising. And so This is the main reason that Lama Tsongkhapa uses, and others in the Gelugpa tradition, and also Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, the great Indian masters. The idea or the reasoning of dependent arising is the one that is recommended to understand emptiness, to come to an understanding of emptiness. This is actually it's called the king of reasons. There's other reasons that can be used as well to understand emptiness, but this is said to be the king of reasons. And one reason why it is recommended is because by using this reasoning, dependent arising, there's less chance that we will fall into the view of nihilism, which is to think, oh, nothing exists at all. Things don't exist at all. Using dependent arising will prevent that problem, and this will become more clear as we go along. Because the process of coming to an understanding of emptiness is a little bit like walking on a tightrope. You got the middle way. This is a very narrow path that we're trying to follow without falling into two big mistakes. One of which is nihilism. That means just thinking nothing exists at all, which apparently is very easy to happen when you do start to get an understanding of emptiness. It's very easy to fall into that one and think, oh, there's no I, there's no body, there's no mind, there's no world, there's no people, there's no nothing. Nothing exists. So that's a dangerous place to fall into, just like falling off a tightrope. The other one is the extreme of what's sometimes called eternalism or permanence, and that is reification. That is where we reify the sense of self. We make it something more than it really is. Okay, so they say Lama Tsongkhapa actually says it's very, very difficult to find the middle way, to be able to avoid those two extremes. But there's a greater chance that we will be able to follow the middle way and get it right by using this reasoning of dependent arising. And then it said that there are 3 ways that things are dependent, so we can contemplate these, and this will enable us to understand emptiness, how things are empty, but it will also enable us to understand that things still do exist conventionally. They're not completely non-existent. So one of these 3, which is pretty easy to understand, is causes and conditions. This applies to all the impermanent phenomena. So impermanent phenomena include like our bodies and what else? What else is impermanent? Our mind, everything in our mind, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions. So our mind is impermanent. All the material phenomena in the world around us, right? Even a Buddha is impermanent. Well, some aspects of a Buddha. Okay, so probably most of the things that we deal with in our life, our ordinary life, and even in our spiritual life are impermanent phenomena. They include all material things and all mental things, the mind, and so on. So there are impermanent phenomena. So impermanent phenomena depend on causes and conditions. So it's easy to see that with like our body. You know, a body came from our parents, especially our mother, grew up in her womb and was fed by, substances in her body. And then after we were born, we drank lots and lots of milk and started eating food, and we got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so here we are. So, and this continues, like every day. We need certain causes and conditions to stay alive. We need food, we need water, we need air to breathe, we need the right temperature. If it goes to 50 below zero, or 100 below zero, it might be hard to survive. Or if it goes to, very, very, very hot. People die when it's too hot or too cold. So we can only survive in this certain temperature range. So just every day, to keep alive from one moment to the next, we depend on causes and conditions. Otherwise, we die. And the same is true all the material phenomena. The table came from wood, and the carpenter, and the tools used to make it, and so forth and so forth. So that's not too difficult to understand.
Could we agree that everything that we can perceive, the mind can perceive, is impermanent?
It depends on what you mean by perceive.
Well, there's something which we cannot perceive.
You mean perceive with our senses, with our five senses?
With our analytical mind. So there's certain phenomena which we cannot perceive, which is beyond our intellect, but we can that it's possible to logically,
conceptually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everything that we can perceive, everything that we can discuss, talk about, think about, describe, then that must be impermanent. It must be subject to causes and conditions.
Well, that's not completely true, because emptiness is a permanent phenomenon. It's not an impermanent phenomenon, and it is something that can be perceived by the mind. I mean, we can't perceive it. I mean, ordinary beings can't perceive it, but if we work on our mind, we can eventually get to the point where the mind is able to perceive emptiness directly. Ordinary minds, ordinary beings. Ordinary beings. Yeah, we can only perceive impermanent things, as far as I know. Yeah. Well, uncompounded space, that's the permanent type of space. I don't think we can perceive that. It's not perceivable. It can be conceptually understood, but not perceived. I mean, when we see, can we really see that we see space? Can we say that we see space? Not really. Yeah.
We can understand that.
We can understand
all material phenomena through the body.
Yeah, but that's a conceptual mind that understands it.
But not even conceptual, because you look in a microscope and you can see the space between bits. And then you say, yes, there is space between.
But they do say that there's two kinds of space. There's compounded space, which is impermanent, and there's uncompounded space, which is permanent. Mm-hmm. So the compounded space, the space that we can see, like this, the word for space and the word for sky are the same in Tibetan. So when we look up in the sky, they would say, oh, we see the space, we see the sky, we see the space. So that space, you say, is the impermanent type of space, not the permanent one. Anyway, this is complicated. Yeah. So anyway, whatever is an impermanent phenomenon, which is most of the things that we deal with, most of the things we see and touch and talk about and think about and so on, most of the stuff in our life is impermanent phenomenon. And all of those things depend on causes and conditions. They all come into existence in dependence on other things. If it weren't for those causes and conditions, they wouldn't exist. So they are dependent. If the causes and conditions are taken away, those phenomena don't exist, can't exist. So that's how they are dependent. Yeah. And then the second way things are dependent is on parts. Things are made up of parts. This is true for everything, both permanent things and impermanent things. So whatever exists has parts. This is a Buddhist view, a Buddhist assertion. You may disagree, but if you do, you have to come up with something that doesn't have parts. You have to be able to find an example of something that doesn't have parts. So it's not too difficult with regard to impermanent things like our body. We know our body has lots of parts, and material phenomena, they all have parts. We can take them apart. And also, like with physics, we know that things are made up of molecules and atoms and smaller parts down to quarks and whatever. I don't know what's the smallest thing that they can find. And our mind is not a physical thing, but it's a non-physical thing, but it has parts too. One way it has parts is each moment, moment by moment by moment, our mind is changing. So each moment, new thoughts or perceptions or feelings or whatever are coming up. and then they pass, and the next one comes up, and the next one comes up. So those are all parts of the mind, the different experiences that arise in the mind moment by moment. And it also has parts in the sense that the mind can be divided up. This is a complicated topic, but anyway, different types of mind, different mental factors, and so forth. So those are also parts of the mind. Now, maybe it's harder to understand with permanent phenomena. How do permanent phenomena have parts?
So they say that uncompounded space has north, east, west, and south.
Yeah.
If we can even imagine what uncompounded space is, then we can logically then it still has parts to its dimension.
Yeah. And we just the space in this room, we can talk about. There's the space in the eastern corner. I don't know which way is east here, but anyway, the eastern corner and the western corner and the northern corner and up above and down below. And so we can, there are parts.
And then there's the emptiness of the mind.
Now, emptiness, let's look at how emptiness, which is a permanent phenomenon, how does that have parts? Can we divide up emptiness, cut up emptiness into parts?
So you're sitting there with an empty mind, free of thought, free of sensations, free of all that. Does it still have parts, apart from the moment to moment?
Well,
does it have geography?
Not physical, no, it wouldn't be physical parts, but the way the way emptiness has parts is that so emptiness is like a quality of everything that exists. Okay, so there's the emptiness of my body and the emptiness of your body and the emptiness of everybody's body. There's the emptiness of our mind. There's the emptiness of the table. There's the emptiness of the Buddha. There's the emptiness of Copenhagen, and so on and so forth. So whatever phenomena exists, there's the emptiness of that phenomena. So there's actually many, 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 many emptinesses. For however many phenomena there are that many emptinesses. So emptiness doesn't exist as something out there separate from phenomena, from ourselves and the things in the world and so on. Emptiness is right here. It's part of our body, part of our mind, part of all the things around us. So it's a quality.
Existing really labeled parts.
Well, yeah, you can say that. There's nothing that's not merely labeled. But anyway, that's how emptiness has parts. It takes a while to think about that and get a sense of what that is. But that's how even emptiness, a permanent phenomena, has parts. Okay, so thinking about how things have parts also helps us to understand how they are dependent, because if something has parts, if you take away the parts, then that thing doesn't exist anymore, right? It won't exist without its parts. So it's dependent on its parts in order for it to exist. So it doesn't exist independently. The reason dependent arising is so helpful is because the wrong view we have of things, the mistaken view we have of things, usually it's called inherent existence or true existence, but it can also be called independent existence. It's, when we see an object, it appears as if it's independent of everything else. It's able to stand by itself, all by itself, out there, self-contained, autonomous, totally existing on its own, not depending on anything else. So that's how things appear to us, to our misconception that doesn't understand emptiness. So it's a wrong way of appearing. It's a mistaken way of appearing. And by understanding how things exist dependently, then it breaks down the idea that things are independently existing. It's an impossible way of existing, for something to be existing totally independently. So those two aren't very difficult to understand. The third way is more difficult. This is dependence on being merely labeled by the mind. And this applies to both permanent and impermanent phenomena, all phenomena. whatever exists, is dependent on being labeled by the mind, being merely labeled by the mind. So maybe now it's a good time to take a break. Because this is a hard one, but maybe if you have some refreshments, you'll be... Huh? Yeah, there's some stimulants that will help you to get into this one. So let's have a 10-minute break.
She's kind of
Who?
Do you know why we don't say the Taya Ta on the front of that movie?
Well, what happened was last year, Rinpoche was here, and he gave some public talks, public teachings. And at one point, he spoke about this prayer and mantra of the Buddha and the benefits of it. Like just saying it one time will purify. I don't know what was it, 800 billion eons of karma, bad karma. And this is the way he gave it. The prayer and the mantra, he gave it this way. So
he also said that there been some mistakes. Muni.
Yeah.
Muni. He said this is actually Muni and Muni, so he corrected this part also.
Yeah, there are different ways of pronouncing Muni, Muni,
So
Muni,
it's
Muni.
slightly mistaken translation from a long time ago. But
Yeah.
people still believe in it, so it still works. But,
Yeah. So I think the Taya Ta also it's part of other mantras, and I've heard that it's optional. Like if you like the medicine Buddha mantra, Taya Ta. Sometimes they say you can leave the Taya Ta off. It's like optional.
I don't know, for me, I have such a strong connection with Lama Zopa.
Yeah.
So I just can't stand it.
I know.
So I just can hear every time I do it, I can hear Lama Zopa.
I know. I just thought I should
No, I know.
do it the way
Rinpoche
Rinpoche said
there
it.
had to be a reason I just wanted to know.
Yeah. Well,
Change.
we could change it.
Well, there is change.
it's also
So-
like learning the prayers, like
What's going on over there? Are they?
the refuge prayers. So it's worded slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, Rinpoche is always
Could
changing
you
everything
turn
slightly.
off the lights?
Oh, yes.
I
Yeah,
think
oh,
Joseph,
sorry.
the correct pronunciation is
Muni.
Muni. Okay.
As far as I heard correctly.
I think Sean's just-
Muni, Muni, Mahani, Shambhu.
Yeah, Niels and Sean. Who is sitting there? Was somebody sitting next to you yet?
And discuss something.
They're trying to-
Okay.
She decided to go to the hostel, and so they're trying to help her get there.
Oh,
So it's taking-
she needs to go to the hospital.
Hostel. She's staying.
Oh,
in a
hostel. I
and
thought she said hospital.
she just arrived in Sweden, and she realized she needs to go to bed. So I guess they
Yeah.
it's taking a while to figure out how she's going to get there.
Okay. Anyway, we'll continue, and
That was the really label, which is the best part.
well.
Maybe they heard it before.
Anyway, so these are the three ways that we can contemplate how things are dependent. And I personally find it really helpful because emptiness is a difficult thing to understand, but understanding how things exist dependently isn't so difficult. And so contemplating these, especially the first two, which are easier, it really does help to kind of loosen the sense of things existing in a very real and solid, concrete way out there, really existing out there from their own side. So contemplating these points can kind of loosen that or soften that. And that really helps, especially with like disturbing emotions. If you're feeling really angry or really frightened or really jealous or attached or whatever. So if there's some object that you have disturbing emotions about, contemplating how it depends on causes and conditions, how it depends on parts. And if you're able to understand the third point as well, that also helps. So it just helps to cool down your mind and really gives relief to your disturbing emotions. And it does eventually lead to an understanding of emptiness. And it's, as I mentioned before, and it's mentioned again and again in this tradition, that it's good, you know, to begin our investigation of emptiness with our own sense of self, or I. But that's actually also kind of a difficult thing, because it's so abstract, you know, like the sense of self, I, me, is something kind of abstract. It's not something tangible, not something visible. It's more like, yeah, I feel it. I feel there's an I in there somewhere. But, you know, it's hard to get a strong feeling for it. But so it can be helpful to work with some object that is more visible and more tangible, you know, something we can actually see, something we can touch, and try to get an understanding of how that is dependent. And then it's easier to apply that to something like our sense of self, or I. So let's look at this one. Right.
I am my bicycle.
So when we see this picture, a picture like this, or when we see an actual bicycle out in the street, what happens in our mind? We immediately have this thought, bicycle, or whatever it is in your respective language, in Suco or Spanish. What is what is it in Spanish? Bici. Bici. Okay. So, you know, when we are children, we are told the name of this kind of object, and then we just, you know, then we start using that word, and that becomes part of our vocabulary and part of our our way of relating to things. So as soon as we see this kind of object, we immediately think that is a bicycle or whatever. And probably most of us never go beyond that. You know, we never think about this more deeply, more carefully. You know, well, what exactly is a bicycle? And how does it exist? What is its real nature, and so forth? We probably don't come up with questions like that. We just, you know, buy one and then jump on it and ride around on it and enjoy ourselves. That in the Madhyamika system of philosophy, which is the one that talks about emptiness, they say that whenever we see an object, whatever object it is, even if we don't know what it's called, even if we don't know the name of this object, and we don't know what it is, still our instinctive, intuitive way of seeing that object is, as it seems to have this real way of existing out there from its own side, independent of everything else. It has this kind of independent way of existing. And that's the meaning of inherent existence. So it's just sort of a gut level, instinctive, intuitive feeling, experience that we have with an object. So we don't see an object like a bicycle as something that came into existence in dependence on causes and conditions, depending on its parts, being merely labeled by the mind. We don't see it like that. Even if you may object, and you may think, yeah, but when I got my bicycle, it was all in parts, and I put it together, so I know it's made of parts. But still, if you really check, even if you did go through that process and intellectually, conceptually, you know it's made of parts. But when it comes to our kind of gut level, instinctive and emotional way of relating to it, we probably still see it as if it's existing independently from its own side. And this becomes apparent if we have some kind of experience, like if it gets stolen or if it gets run over by a big truck, and it ends up as just this mangled mass of, you know, twisted steel and rubber and everything. So if that happened, we would probably be very upset, devastated even, depending on how strongly you identify with and are attached to your bicycle. But it's possible, you know, you can get really, really upset. And having that kind of reaction according to the Madhyamika system, it comes because of this innate, inborn. It's not that we deliberately choose to be this way, but it's something we're born with. We have this innate grasping at everything as inherently existing, and that includes ourself. We have a sense of a real, inherently existing, independently existing I or me who wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, and so on and so forth. And then we, based on that, we started collecting things that will make us happy, like bicycles and other things and so on. And then we tend to get a sense of ownership. My bicycle, that's my bicycle. And then some attachment as well. We start having associations and projections and romantic fantasies and so on. So I don't know. It's possible. Possible. People can get really obsessed with things. No? People pay a lot of money for bicycles here. I've looked at some of the prices. God, wow, amazing. And special, you know, I see some of the bicycles people bring onto the train. They look really like custom made, and you know, I kind of get a sense that people are quite attached to their bicycles. So
get stolen, then you realize
the pain. No, I mean that happens to me with my junky old bike that, you know, was given to me. You know, it's not working very well right now, and I really feel sad about that. Anyway, anyway, so the all this stuff, including the pain, the suffering, comes because of our this instinctive, innate conception of things as existing inherently, independently from their own side. And so the recommendation is that we investigate how we see things and see if they really do exist the way we perceive them or not. Because it seems, as far as I can know, this doesn't include me, it's not my experience, but when somebody does have a realization of emptiness, you know, when they've realized emptiness, their way of reacting is very, very different. They don't get attached. And if something did happen, they would probably just laugh about it and, you know, not get upset about it. So, so they have a different way of reacting to things. So it takes time to get to that point. We can get there one day, but it does take time. But in the meantime, until we realize emptiness, it is helpful to contemplate how an object like a bicycle arises dependently. For example, how it depends on causes and conditions. We can think about, you know, the factory that it came from and all the people involved in making it, and then the raw materials that come from many different sources, the metal and the rubber and the plastic and whatever, you know, all the different things involved in it. And they come from so many different places and so many different processes and different machines and tools that are made and so on. So we're just contemplating that whole process of how it came into existence. It can really help to de-solidify it, yeah, to make it seem less solid and real. And then it's also helpful to contemplate how it is dependent on parts. Yeah, so when we look at this picture, okay, or if we were in a place and there were all these bicycle parts lying on the ground, when we look at this, do we think there's a bicycle?
No.
Yeah, this is what some people might say. I mean, they would still say, yes, it's a bicycle that's been taken apart.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bicycle that's not yet assembled. They still say it's a bicycle.
Part of the box. Still bicycle.
Hmm?
You put each part in a box, wrapped it up in a box.
Well, this is what Madhyamika philosophy says. You know, they say, well, let's look for this real bicycle. You know, because when we look at the bicycle in the previous picture, you know, it seems like there's a real bicycle there, especially if it's my bicycle. Okay? My bicycle, my, you know, 10,000 krona bicycle. Yeah. then it seems real, like there's a real bicycle there. So the Madhyamika philosophy would say, well, where is this real bicycle? What exactly is this real bicycle? So it's very helpful to, I mean, you don't have to do this physically, you can do it mentally, mentally take it apart and just contemplate all the different parts that make up the bicycle. And I mean, it sounds maybe silly, but it's actually really helpful to do, to look at each part at it, one part at a time, and say, is this a bicycle? The seat up there, is that a bicycle? Obviously not. The handlebars, that's not a bicycle. The frame, the main part, that's not a bicycle. The wheel. So really, look at each part individually and determine, just become convinced that that itself is not a bicycle. So if you go through this process, and it is helpful to go through this process with each part and come to a certainty that each part is not a bicycle. So then where is the bicycle? What is the bicycle? Because we have this feeling, this sense that when we put all the parts together in the right way, has to be the right way, put all the parts together in the right way and look at that, the assembly of all those parts, there's a bicycle there, right? Now there's a bicycle.
At what stage does it become the bicycle from separate parts?
Yeah. So if there's no bicycle now, we can't find a bicycle now, looking at all these different parts. And then we put the parts together, and then is that thunder?
Yes.
Or it's maybe something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's too thunder.
Fireworks or thunder?
No, it's thunder.
Thunder's thunder.
Yeah, it said there was going to be thunderstorms tonight. I didn't bring a raincoat.
You see the newly labeled thunder and then newly labeled fireworks. Just thinking.
Okay, let's go back to this. This takes concentration. Go through the process of putting all the parts together. Voila! It's a bicycle. Okay. So if there was no bicycle here in the parts, the disassembled parts, then how is it that there's a bicycle here?
Because it functions as a bicycle.
Well, you got the answer. But I
would say it's because a bicycle is a name for a lot of different parts.
well, that's the Madhyamika view.
Okay.
But
Maybe
what
the
I'm
old
talking
fashioned
about is our gut feeling, okay, our gut level, before we start thinking about all these things, if we haven't heard Madhyamika philosophy, this feeling, there's a bicycle there. There's a real bicycle there.
The only way that I know that was a bicycle is if somebody told me. If I learned that was a bicycle from somebody else, as a baby would not know this is a bicycle.
Yeah,
So
that's
I only
true.
know this because somebody pointed out to me and said to me, "This is a bicycle. You start with a tricycle, and it grew up to be a big bike." Otherwise, I wouldn't know that was a bicycle. I had no clue. If a Chinese guy came to me and said something else.
Yeah, but that's true. But my understanding is that even a small child who hasn't learned language, or even an animal that doesn't know language, would still have some kind of conceptual designation of this object. Not bicycle, but something. Yeah, they would still relate to it. The baby would see that and have some kind of conceptualization about it and probably be really fascinated by it. Yeah, so there's always some kind of conceptualization of the object, depending on...
what's the difference between the parts and the thing? Right? That's what you're asking.
Yeah, well, no, it's just like our sense, okay, we're not talking about babies and dogs and so on, but our experience of that as a bicycle. What is the bicycle? Because I was reading in one book about one of the pre-Buddhist Indian philosophies. There are all these different philosophical systems in India. And one of these, I can't remember the name of it, actually said, this is part of their philosophy, that something like a bicycle is a new phenomena. It's like a new phenomena that comes into existence when you put all the parts together. And I thought, well, actually, that's how it seems. You know, I think our gut level feeling is when we put all the parts together, it's a bicycle. It's almost like magic. Yeah, it's like this magic thing. Oh, it's a bicycle now, you know. But where is that bicycle? You know, if it wasn't there before, where did it come from? So I just thought it was really interesting that they actually made that into a philosophical idea, that it's a separate phenomena, a new phenomena, separate from the parts, something brand new that just came into existence when the parts are put together. So I thought, well, that's how it seems. Yeah, that's how it feels. But if that was true, according to Madhyamika philosophy, we should be able to find it. We should be able to point to it. So if it wasn't there before, like, you know, when there's all the parts there, and it's here now, oops, went the wrong way. Where is it? What is this bicycle we can point to? Because if you try to point to any part of the bicycle, it's only a part of the bicycle rather than a bicycle. We've already determined that. If that's only a part of the bicycle, you point to the seat. No, that's not a bicycle, that's the seat. So you actually can't point to anything. You can't put your finger on anything, which is this bicycle.
It's the sum of the parts.
Yeah. But then if you take away the seat or the handlebar, it's still a bicycle.
No, because it's not the same parts. It has to be all the parts.
No, it doesn't. If you chop off your leg, are you still a human being?
Yeah, but that's different.
But what Chandrakirti says to that, the collection of the parts,
yeah, right.
He says, well, if it's the collection of the parts, then here we have a collection of parts.
Right.
And you could just put them in a pile. You could just put them in a big pile and say there's a bicycle. But that wouldn't work.
But then it depends on each person has a different view, and it's a correct view because it's their view of a heap of parts might still be a bicycle, where somebody else who want to do a 1 hour sprint would not look at that as a bicycle. He would still say, yeah, that's a bicycle, but it's not my bike. And somebody else who uses it as a transport would say, that's not a bike either, but because this is my bike.
Yeah.
So
Well, of course, people can have different conceptions about things. Somebody might be happy with a pile of parts and say, that's a bicycle. But then does it function as a bicycle? Does it function as a bicycle? Well, I mean, we have to have a certain amount of conventional wisdom there, you know. And
the second-hand part guy looking at selling bicycle parts would be very happy to have a bicycle like that and would not want to have a whole bike. They would still call it a bicycle.
Well, I'm not sure. They would probably call it bicycle parts.
Okay, well, tell me, why is it the sum of the parts? Why isn't it the parts?
You mean just the collection? Because then this would be a
it's the
bicycle.
parts, but when it's all put together, it's all the parts put together. What's wrong with saying that is the bicycle? All the parts put together.
Now, I knew the answer to that a couple years ago.
She wants to know it as well because she forgot that. So come on, between the two, you're going to get this right now. Imagine Mika's come close.
Yeah. Well, it is a hard one. That is one of the hardest ones. And I did figure it out at one point in time when we were studying Madhyamika Avatar. Yeah, I have to go back and figure it out. Yeah.
That's why I asked. That's what it seems.
But I think
my gut reaction is.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's when it's all put together. That's
in the right way.
In the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. I'll go. My mind. I'm not a night person, so.
It would still be a correct clarification of that. If you took one pedal off, it would still be a bicycle minus one pedal. So you could keep saying that it is still a bicycle, functions as a bicycle, it just doesn't have the seat.
Yeah, that's true.
So, or you could still say, hey, this is a wheel of a bicycle, but you're just missing all the other parts. It's still a bicycle wheel.
And then you take one more part. Is it still a bicycle?
Of course.
When does it not become a bicycle?
Exactly.
But and then the great thing is that when I was contemplating this, if you keep going this whole circle route of keep removing all the bits and pieces of it, you could keep going all the way through Etienne and all the way back again, and you could relax because it's still a bicycle at the end of the day. You know, when you've gone through all
Well-
the causes and conditions that possibly make that you are now have this bicycle wheel in your hand, and go through all of this and come back to the beginning and then relax because it's still a bicycle.
The
Yeah.
problem is we're still attached to the idea of a bicycle somewhere. So we're still looking at that picture. And we're still attached. That's still a bicycle. No matter how you reorder those parts, we are still attached to the idea
That's right.
of the bicycle.
So the bicycle
Where?
is just the idea.
Not if you break down the parts of the parts. Like if you went down into the particles of those parts, what is it? If you're looking under a microscope, it's definitely not a bike anymore. Those are like the
You lose everything.
gross forms. Right.
Yeah.
But if you go more and more subtle, that'll totally disappear.
Yeah, because even the parts, you know, we can get very hung up on a bicycle part, a bicycle seat, a bicycle wheel. But then that too can be broken down into finer and finer parts. And you get down to that very subtle level, and apparently they find there's just a lot of space, and it gets really weird. So there's really nothing there.
So we're looking at it through our senses, and we have very limited senses. You know, other animals will see a completely different energetic level of those parts. They'll see the thermostatic energy instead of what we see is just
That's
flat energy.
Yeah.
Like cats.
So anyway, we're getting short of time, but anyway, this is an exercise. It's very interesting to do this, to look at the parts of things. And so what the Madhyamika philosophers say is the bicycle, there is a bicycle. Bicycle does exist, but how it exists, what it exists, is that it's merely labeled.
It's a concept.
Well, we wouldn't want to say bicycle is just a concept, because you can't write a concept, right?
I'm sitting in one right now. I'm living in one.
And you do.
This is a concept.
Well, you can argue with Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna about that. But anyway, what they say is that they use this kind of complicated terminology. One term is imputed object. They have the imputed object. So in this case, the imputed object is the bicycle. That's what is being imputed or named or labeled. And then the basis, there's always a basis of imputation, and that's the parts of the bicycle. So, and they need to be put together in the right way so that it does function as a bicycle. So when you have the parts of the bicycle, that's the basis for imputing bicycle, the name bicycle. The bicycle is really nothing more than just what is named or what is labeled or what is imputed onto those parts and cannot be found. The bicycle cannot be found when you look among the parts, or you look outside of the parts. You also can't find it somewhere else. It just can't be found anywhere. So it's just labeled, merely. That's the meaning of merely labeled. Now, this is not, in some ways, it might think, oh yeah, that's easy to understand. I can understand that, but it's actually not that easy, because it totally goes against how we normally see things. And they say if we really get a sense of what this means, we get a kind of shock. You know, we feel like our mind's been turned inside out, or we feel like we've been struck by lightning. His Holiness said that. He said he was once reading a text about selflessness, and he actually got a feeling of it, a sense of it. And it was just like being struck by lightning. It's really a shock, you know, when we really get an understanding of what this means. Okay, now let's apply this to the I, me, myself. It's also merely labeled. So the imputed object is I, and the basis of imputation are, well, the Buddhist term is aggregates. In other words, our body and mind, this collection of physical and mental parts, components that make us up. So this mass of physical and mental stuff is the basis of imputation. It's not I. There's nothing we can find anywhere within us, no part of us that we can point to and say that is the I. So I is just labeled, imputed, on top of, onto, or in dependence on our body and mind. And there's a nice quotation from a sutra. This is from a Pali Sutra. And it was a nun who said this. Yay. So this nun was a disciple of the Buddha. She was meditating in the forest, and Mara, there's lots of stories about Mara coming along and disturbing meditators. So Mara came along and said something to her about herself and so on. And this is her reply. Just as with an assemblage of parts, the word chariot, or we could say bicycle, is used, so when the aggregates are present, there's the convention, a being, a sentient being, a human being, a man, a woman, I, me, whatever. So it's just a convention, just a conventional way of referring to a being. Just as bicycle is just a conventional way of referring to this collection of wheels and so on. Anyway, that's a nice way of saying it. So just to go on with the text, I wanted to cover a couple more verses because we're running out of time. So this is the next verse, verse 10 of the text. He's saying here, well, whoever sees that the causes and effects of all phenomena in cyclic existence and beyond are unfailing. Do you know what beyond means? Beyond.
Traditional Buddhist take note of that.
Yeah, in this context.
Describe what beyond is.
What's beyond?
You mean some nirvana or something?
Yeah, beyond cyclic existence. That means nirvana, enlightenment. What's out? Yeah, Buddhahood. So this is basically what it says: all phenomena in cyclic existence and beyond. That just means all phenomena everywhere. That everything that exists everywhere in the universe, both in samsara and out of samsara. Everything, in other words. So the causes and effects of all these things are unfailing. Now the meaning of unfailing is that causes and effects works. Cause and effect is true. It's valid. You put seeds in the ground and provide the right conditions, and you got crops and plants. You put together the parts of the bicycle, you get a bicycle. You can ride around on it. You make a baby. You put the right conditions together. You have a baby. Okay, so this is true. This is true. It works. Things work. Well, it's just talking about conventional existence. Yeah, and karma. And also karma, we create karma and we get results of karma. That also is true. So all of these things are true. And so a person who sees that, understands that, and then at the same time, they thoroughly destroy the mainstay of misconceptions. Now that's not very clear what he's talking about there, but in the commentary it says, the mainstay of misconceptions refers to inherent existence or true existence, the false mode of existence, which actually doesn't exist, but we create it with our mind. So this false mode of existence. So somebody who totally destroys that, true existence, inherent existence, but at the same time, they can see that cause and effect still operates. Okay, so destroying inherent existence doesn't mean you destroy all phenomena. Phenomena do exist and cause and effect works, but they're not inherently existing. They are empty of inherent existence. So a person who's able to do those two things, keep those two things together in balance, walks on the path that pleases the Buddhas. In other words, this is the right way to go. This is the right way to go to get out of samsara and to get to nirvana, get to enlightenment, and so on. So basically, he's just saying we need to understand emptiness and refute the false mode of existence, but do it in a way that we don't eliminate conventional phenomena. That there are phenomena in samsara and beyond, and cause and effect works. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's why I spent a lot of time talking about dependent arising first, because if we do understand how things exist dependently, depending on parts, depending on causes and conditions and so on, then we will understand they do exist. They do exist. Cause and effect does work, but they're just empty of inherent or independent existence.
They have to be. They have to be. in order to be dependent.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, that if that comes later.
Oh,
Later in the text. We won't have time for that tonight. But yeah. So in fact, this is like going back to what we were talking about earlier, the two truths. One of the earlier, the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. Those two things are compatible. Conventional truth, cause and effect, things arise in dependence on parts, and so on and so on. That's conventional truth. And then ultimate truth, things are empty. So those two things are not contradictory. They don't contradict each other. They are completely compatible. They are like two sides of a coin, two sides of a hand. They exist together. In fact, they can't be separated. They actually,
necessary parts.
yeah, they're necessary. They depend on each other. Okay,
That is true existence.
so just one more verse. Whoops. Oh, what happened? Huh. What's going on? I have one more slide. Why? What's going on? Okay, maybe I'm wrong. I thought we were going to do one more verse. No. This was the last verse. Sorry. I thought I had planned to go on to one more verse. No, this was the last one. Sorry. Next week. Next week we will finish. Yeah.
I have a question about the bicycle parts.
Yeah.
When we took the parts all together and put them in a different order, then we said, no, what do we see? Of course, the mind was still saying, I still see bicycle and I still see the parts. The question that I posed to myself, do you see the space in between the parts? We didn't see that when the bike was assembled, and yet that space is still there.
Take everything else though, not just the bicycle.
Yeah, but do we see the space? And that's also the problem with the mind. It attaches itself to the object which is most identifiable, but we don't see the space around that. And if we can see the space around things, then we can also have more of a detachment to those things. And then we don't see the bicycle in its part, but we see there's some parts and there's some space in between them. We have a detachment.
When you say the space between the parts, you're just talking about like
Physical space between
the
parts.
space between the spokes of the wheels.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. All of that.
Mhm.
That's also part of the picture, but we don't necessarily identify with that space.
Mhm.
It's not what's catching our attention of the senses. And yet, when if we can train ourselves to look at the space around the object, then suddenly we get a bigger picture, actually. And that's, I think, when we look into the mind, that also begins to transform the way we see things.
Isn't this something that artists deal with?
Yes, exactly. Negative
Space. I mean, I'm not an artist, so I don't know,
negative
but
space.
the
If we look at the
working with
the light,
space. Yeah. Mm.
Then if we conceptualize, looking at it at an energetic level, then there's no difference between that interface between space and the energy. Because we identify as our body by the skin. Our body stops at the skin level. But if we look at the energetic level of the body, which we can do through an infrared camera, then that space actually extends the skin. And therefore we can do the same with our mind. Does our mind stop? Where? So where is our mind? Is it in the body? I think most people will consider.
It's very Mahamudra, isn't it? Are you going to go into that on the weekend?
Yeah, probably will.
Where is the mind? What color is the mind? Where does it come from? Where does it go to?
That physical, those boundaries, the energetic, but then it's very real, very present. But they can feel that this is where this person's energy field actually starts. And then they can go into that, but we consider ourselves, no, my body is right here where I can touch myself. The mind can go beyond that sense of touch. So, and our sense of space as well. So you're invading my sense of space. How far away do you have to be away from me to invade my space? That's quite an experiment.
Well, it's different for different people.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very different.
So what are the characteristics of that space?
Mm.
So how much space do you need? Time in the morning, you need time. Give me my space. Actually, I just need time alone. So that's, I just wanted to throw that in.
I have a question too. For me, and I guess I'm just asking other people's experiences, but for me, it's easier to understand how the eyes live on the aggregates than it is to understand how the bicycles live on the bicycle. Because the bicycle is so concrete, whereas the eye is always kind of moving around and is not really, I mean, I can already feel or know that my eye isn't one with my body and my mind. That's really obvious to me. But I don't really understand, how the bicycle is separate from the bicycle. Because bicycleness, the suchness of the bicycle is right in that bicycle. Whereas it's easy for me to see that my mind isn't right here.
I have the opposite
You
experience.
do?
Yeah,
Well,
for
that's why I
me,
wanted to check, because I just was just curious.
for me, I have a really hard time with
Yeah.
with an eye, the sense of eye, because it feels so real.
Yeah.
It really feels like a real me in there.
Yeah.
But a collection of parts, a
Yeah.
collection of metal and so on. And you call that a bicycle? That's I find that easy to understand. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm deluding myself. But for me, it's much easier to see it with material things, but much harder with the self.
For me, the eye is really difficult to say.
Mm.
I think there's the motivation to discuss this particular topic. It's varies from person to person. So we relate to bicycles, me, I, or in whatever, in our own way, we find that thing that actually makes sense to us and it'll be different from everybody to make that understanding. And the problem with these discussions is it kind of gets stuck on the bicycle or the inherent existent I, which then a Lama or a teacher gets stuck into that because that's what he understands, which has no relation to anybody else. And we will have to find that kind of space in us. To say, that's where it is. Okay, now I understand that.
I guess that's why you have to do your homework.
And try and find out to make it more relaxed and to make this something that's usable in everyday life and to go to places where you use the same kind of logic until you get it in your life, which is going to be different to mine, different to hers, and different to yours and everybody else.
So you're saying it could be useful to try it out on different objects and
Everything.
find one that really gets you. Yeah.
Or one
I
that
think-
we can all agree on.
No, I think each person.
No,
I think
this
it's good
is-
for
this
each
is- this is
person
what we
to
all-
try.
You can also, we all have a completely different view of the universe, view of different experience. This is, I mean, it's within the realms of phenomenology. So, but then we can say, okay, we all experience things totally different, but is there something we can experience that we believe that we can experience in a similar way? And this is where I think the Buddha can bring you down and say, this is, in fact, something that we can agree on.
That we're into.
Yes,
Or that fire's hot.
yes. Very, very good, yeah.
Mm.
How we experience the sensation of fire, we might, talk about detail, but yes, can we agree on some things that does gravity exist? Do we all agree that gravity exists in this room? There's no one who can say no. Therefore, gravity exists. We now agree. This is phenomenological phenomenon in itself.
Maybe
We can't-
Yogi who could levitate might consider you.
Well, then, but he can still gravity.